Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Kristen with Indie Game Origin, and today I'm really excited to be here to chat with Svetlana and Luke from the team at Bossa Studios, who's working on their title Lost Skies. Now, if you haven't checked it out, definitely check out this trailer. Lost Skies is currently on early release, and I definitely recommend that you go snag it. They are also extremely responsive in the Discord, so if you run into any problems, you can definitely let them know. Any positive or negative feedback does help the developers on this team. If you like these chats with developers, make sure that you like and subscribe. This helps the channel to grow and stay alive so we can continue doing these kinds of chats. You can also join us on Discord, where I'll be announcing new conversations that will be coming up in the future, so you can actually get your questions asked to developers. And without further ado, Lost Skies. Hi everybody, welcome back. I'm Kristen with IGO. I wanted to extend a massive thank you to both Luke and Svetlana for joining me today from Bossa Studios. We're going to be talking about Lost Skies, their new in-progress title that if you know anything about Worlds Adrift, maybe you're a little bit familiar with already. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. And the cat too.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries. She's always welcome. So I was hoping maybe I could ask a little bit about both your roles with the studio and what people can expect from this coming title.
So my name is Luke and I'm the lead designer on Lost Guys.
Awesome. My name is Svetlana. I'm a senior producer on Lost Guys. Been at Bossa for 3 fun years.
Oh yeah, if we're doing timeline or whatever it's the seniority, then yeah, I mean I've been at Bossa, I think coming on 14 years now.
Wow.
Will be in August.
Time is so fast. It's crazy. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm super excited to see. I actually stumbled on Lost Skies sort of on accident. I had heard of Worlds Adrift before. I was familiar with Bossa because of I Am Bread. And when I saw Lost Skies during the Steam Next Fest, I was like, yes, finally, this is time. Our time to shine. Floating Islands exploration. This is so perfectly built for me and many people who watch our channel. I know a little bit about the history with Worlds Adrift, and I think Lost Skies, if I'm interpreting it right, seems like a bit of a spiritual successor from this game. You know, how much influence did come from Worlds Adrift? How has that influenced the design and development of your current title?
Yeah, I mean I think the main kind of pillars were just this core concept of me and my friends can build a skyship and then explore the world of floating islands together ultimately. And so that core kind of didn't really change. What shifted was a move away from kind of like sandbox, no rules kind of MMO to something a little bit more smaller scale and sensible scope, which is just more akin to a kind of co-op survival game. Kind of akin to, yeah, I mean, in between the release of stuff like Worlds Adrift and Lost Skies, you had stuff like Breath of the Wild, had Valheim, Subnautica, all these kind of games that kind of shifted, brought in kind of those influences and said, if we are going to shift from an MMO into this co-op space, what else are they doing? What's interesting out there? And so like one of the main things that we kind of knew worked from Worlds Adrift was like the exploration side of it. People were really compelled to explore these handcrafted islands, right? But we wanted to add a little bit more to the islands to really ramp up that gameplay and exploration. So that's when we started thinking about puzzles and little co-op gameplay elements, things like that. Taking kind of inspiration from Breath of the Wild, right? The way that every corner you pass in that world, you're like, oh, what's this strange little like Korok puzzle or like physics like ball that I can roll world somewhere, and seeing how we could kind of like bring all that into the islands and make them a lot more engaging to explore.
Yeah, I think that the two things probably that were also obviously part of Worlds Adrift and really important to Skies is the grappling hook that people loved and still love, and we keep getting lots of feedback about, well, some people claim it's the best grappling hook they've ever used in the game. Having ship as your base, but we did put quite a lot of work into, well, refining these systems further, making them hopefully even better.
Yeah, and even with the grappling hook, I spoke about those puzzle elements and gameplay. When we had the grappling hook, we were like, how do we incorporate that into some of these puzzles and some of this gameplay? Because we knew that was really strong, and we sort of knew we were going to keep that. And so we had stuff like little like sort of race around islands, collecting stuff that you need your grappling hook for, and there's another puzzle that you need to attach your grappling line to it to like electrify it, and then you wrap it around like pylons to sort of reactivate the generator and switch on like a door or something.
Yeah, I really loved so many of the elements, including the grappling hook in the early access. I snuck into the Discord and started playing through some of the early access challenges. And I do have to say, I love games like Horizon that also utilizes a grappling hook in kind of a unique sort of way. But I think it must be, from a coding and design perspective, incredibly difficult to actually put into a game. So I think that's probably my biggest hang up, is trying to make sure, not in Lost Skies, just in general, is trying to make sure that I'm pointing at the right place to do it. And you start to think about the UX and the code that would have to be involved to make it function, and it feels very seamless in the game. I can tell there's been a lot of testing that's happened behind the scenes, and so it sounds like there's a huge overlap between the elements that are in this game, sort of the influences that are behind these games as well. Has public interest shifted since, Lost Skies is sort of its own world, even though it is impacted, influenced a lot from Worlds Adrift? Has the reception that you've gotten from your community or from the public shifted at all in that time?
I can go. I think that we always had the core community of very interested and invested players from Worlds Adrift who were really excited about Lost Skies, but I think we kind of expanded that player base more, and it kind of caters to people who maybe wanted more PvE from Worlds Adrift, but lots of people who are like maybe into Valheim or Subnautica, like Luke mentioned. And I think it's a bit of both at the moment. So we are seeing that we basically have the original Worlds Adrift players come back and enjoy Skies, but people who also discovered it for the first time as well.
Yeah, we always had a sort of lot of push from that community, right? Like for years since Worlds Adrift shut down, they were, begging for it to sort of come back in some form. And so we knew we wanted to kind of honor it in that way and bring this kind of world back to life in something sustainable. So it doesn't rely on external servers that could get shut down in the future or anything like that. Like you see a lot of push towards game preservation these days. And I think that was definitely going into this was a high priority. We took it to the point where if you are a previous Worlds Adrift owner, when you start up Lost Skies, you have a collection of unique items and cosmetics inspired from Worlds Adrift that you get to use in Lost Skies as well. So we definitely want to keep that kind of connection there, but also open up the game and that to a lot more people. Definitely the hardcore PvP elements of Worlds Adrift were off-putting to a lot of people. Like non-consensual PvP is always going to be like a thorny kind of issue. So coming into Lost Skies, like we hear that there's still like a lot of people still just ultimately want to, have huge sky battles with their mates. So we definitely want to like still cater to that. One of the advantages of these kind of like smaller scale kind of co-op games is that you can have custom server rules and custom server setups. So one part of our sort of journey through early access is to allow those kind of rule sets to be available to players. So if you want your hardcore ship battle like sort of PvP server, you can basically.
There's room to grow. I think that's there's room to facilitate lots of different play styles, which I really appreciate about the game, because it's cool that you can take it to a very extreme level. I tend to be the kind of player that just sort of wanders around and pokes things and just sees what happens and tries to solve the puzzles. But it was really fun to see people on social media explore in very different ways with these really in these really specific rule sets that they had kind of set out for themselves. And it's really been fun to see that evolution of how people are interacting with the game over time and how the community interacts on Discord and through places like, your social media platforms as well. And I think what I have noticed a lot about Bossa in general is that the team is very small compared to the size of the games that are made, the scope. You feel like you're in this sort of immense, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Immersive, that's the word. Very immersive experience when you're playing any of these titles. It's honestly impressive that it's come from a studio of this size. And so I'm so curious, from your guys' standpoint, how has it been to try to manage building something that's so immense, that has built such a involved fan base, that has, such a tight-knit community that's really excited about this project? It's probably a lot to handle. How has that been, from a studio standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, for better or for worse, I imagine people probably get annoyed at the amount of, I know Seta especially has to deal with my ambitions and the scope for this kind of stuff. Yeah, you just have to pick your battles in terms of what features you tackle and stuff. And I think some of that immersion actually, like, you can trace that back to stuff like Surgeon Simulator and Iron Bread. I think when you make a world that you can poke at and it responds, with physics and stuff, like, we take all of those lessons, we bring them into even these much bigger projects, and then I think that's that kind of throughput there that you can sort of recognize from our earlier game. I think that definitely helps kind of make the universe feel a little bit more grounded. But then you throw in the multiplayer side of things, and physics of multiplayer is always a challenge. So yeah, there's always a lot of work, and that's usually what we end up tackling quite often. It's just those technical challenges.
Yeah, I think that it's the benefit of being a smaller studio as well, that everyone can be really engaged in the project and know what's going on across multiple areas. So I really like the way we work, that we always play test the game together, and we can't afford to have any wasted work, so to speak. We have to move quite fast, and I think if people feel the sense of ownership over the feature areas they're working on as well, then they can suggest some ideas. For example, if we are talking about community requests and more quality of life, and we have people who are very involved with the systems, they often come up with things that they think are low-hanging fruits, for example, or easy to tackle. So that's a nice way of working. So we don't have to wait for reviews or some more rigid process. We're just a bit more fluid and agile in that way. So I think that's the only way it's possible really with a smaller team to tackle something really complex and big, is to have people have their hands in as many things as possible and be really bought into the vision of the game too.
That's awesome. I love when you can feel the passion of what people are working on, and you can feel how invested they are. And it sounds like agility has been very useful for you. I can say that in my personal line of work, I have dealt with what we call approval hell, for lack of a better way to say, where you get stuck behind 10 steps of things. So it's nice that it sounds like the team works together quite nicely, maybe not always agreeing on stuff, but you can figure out a way through that and help people kind of navigate what it is that they're trying to achieve in their part of the world. And I've noticed through a lot of the community engagement that people give a lot of feedback related to specifically bugs, which I think is really awesome, how responsive the team has been to any kind of issues that they might find in servers or something that's maybe not functioning. Have there been any interactions with the community that have influenced the development roadmap, or maybe led the game in a slightly different direction?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the major one is something that sort of touched on earlier, which was those kind of server rule sets and players being no, we want to be able to duke it out with friends and stuff. And so we were already getting rumblings of that good year or so, maybe more ago, just from our internal play testers. And so that definitely is it might be a slow hand, but it's definitely there, where we were just pushing more and more towards how do we open up our world a little bit? What does our world design look like? Does that enable more of a sandbox environment? Yes, we have our starting island that's kind of curated to guide the player through the initial systems, but if you're a little bit more familiar with the game, can I just say, hey, skip tutorial, dump me on a random island, I want to just find my own way in this world and figure it out with maybe my friends, right? And potentially a more hostile environment. Maybe there's other players who spawned on another island somewhere else. And so yeah, that kind of push for that from the community, very early on, definitely influenced how we actually started to structure the world, and stuff fundamental behind the scenes stuff player data and all this other stuff, to allow ourselves in the future to kind of be able to kind of enable these sort of ways of playing. And so that's what I mean. That is something that's hard to kind of predict early on, but if you start kind of reading into it really early, which was really helpful, because not only did we have a lot of players in the Lost Skies Discord early on, but we also had Worlds Adrift Discord from years ago, right? So we had an initial influx of players. And you kind of read that sentiment and that desire, and you can then sort of just plan early, right? It's not necessarily that you instantly go, quick, we need to develop this feature right now. it's just always in the back of your mind of going, okay, there is a feeling of desire from this, and it's kind of like persistent as we go on through development. So you just sort of, it just nudges you, maybe even like subconsciously, to be like, okay, we need to make sure that we're thinking about players might want to use it in this way, or they might want to play in this way.
Yeah, and in ever since we released into early access, we've definitely been checking like Discord all the time. I think for us it's like the main source of feedback, really. Obviously Steam forums as well, but Discord has been great in helping to identify, well, the bugs firstly that we need to tackle first. So we released 3 hotfixes so far, like within a month, and we're going to release the next one hopefully this week. But because our team, like most people, are quite engaged with the community on Discord anyway, so for design, for example, just ask directly for feedback, like how do you feel about combat with these type of enemies, like what would you like to change, what are the main pain points, and it's amazing. So you just get all this information from there, and then we can prioritize it based on, how many people have been, asking for certain things. So definitely reviewing all the feedback on Discord is super helpful for us, and it changes kind of how we plan things, like whether we focus more on 1.0 at a given time, or we want to push out a couple more hotfixes first, or what should be the features included in the first big content update based on what people desire.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to break the fourth wall for just a brief moment. If you're watching this, go join the Discord, because you actually do get heard, which I think is a really huge advantage of being small and independent, and something that I have really loved, like I said before, that incredibly responsive to how people are feeling about playing the game, which is really incredible. And I'm sure at times it's challenging because there might be players who have maybe conflicting opinions or conflicting experiences. So as a team, does it sort of take priority if it's more tangible to do compared to maybe less tangible, or does it sort of depend on maybe what the timeline looks like? How are some of the decisions for that made, if that's public? Of course.
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, we have to kind of balance between community feedback, what we want to do, and obviously our contract with the publisher as well. But they've been very good at like understanding why we want to do certain things in the order that we do them. Usually, well, it's a balance, right, of like an effort, really, that we put into something and the impact of it. So that's how we prioritize things. If we know something would be like a nice to have, but it would take 2 months, we probably wouldn't do it. We would tackle a few more like low hanging fruit instead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that I've talked a lot about with developers too is this through line that we get with. Something that I've thought about a lot, that we've talked about a lot, is essentially scope creep as well, where you get these really huge ambitions, things that you really want to accomplish. Maybe there's people who really want a certain feature or aspect of gameplay, but it's just not necessarily tangible to do. Now, there's a joke that I heard from a friend of mine who works in VR. He says, if you guess it takes 2 weeks, it takes 16. So every time you want to add something really small, it's maybe not necessarily the smallest thing. So I'm sure it can be difficult to maybe balance that with where you'd like to be in terms of trying to get things published. And I think so far, at least from the public perspective, it looks like you've responded to the vast majority of things that people have talked about, which is such a cool part, I think, of independent studios and being able to take control and take the lead of what you'd like to do. Something I didn't mention in the questionnaire, but we touched on a little bit with the island design, is I did download the island creator. I have been playing in there. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not great at 3D. It's something I'm working on, but I was curious if there is any plan to be able to kind of connect the islands that you have designed. How is the island creator envisioned as being involved with Lost Skies itself? How did those two things overlap?
It was a way of, especially when you're tackling exploration games, it's like your core fantasy. It's very apparent that handcrafted is always king when it comes to that. Like, you start to notice the patterns in procedural, right? And actually, like, this whole process kind of started with Worlds Adrift. We had the island creator for that as well. And initially, it was going to be, we'd have a few handcrafted islands sort of nestled in between just like procedure generated ones, to kind of break them up a little bit. But as we developed the tool, we realized, hey, this is actually not just a dev tool. This could potentially be something that the players could want to play with and experiment with, and hey, maybe we can increase the amount of handcrafted items, right? But it seems like they really got on board with the concept, and then so with Worlds Adrift and now with Lost Skies, we can actually have the entire world made of handcrafted islands, not just a couple splintered in between procedural ones. And I think that like there's this nice special connection there because you get these kind of islands come in and you put them in the world and you watch the creators get excited as people try to like figure out their islands and explore them, and they almost get a reputation within the community. It's like, oh, I loved your islands, like or I hate you for what you did on that one island. Like it's really interesting dynamic that you don't see much in other games. And ultimately the end goal there is, you mentioned about linking your islands. I assume you mean like linking them to each other.
Yeah, if you were able to maybe collaborate, but because in my mind I was wondering if it could be like Minecraft, because this might already exist, and I apologize if I missed that feature. But I was imagining, inviting a friend, and we can essentially build this environment together that we can completely mess around in. It looks like that might be already possible at this time.
Yeah, I mean the Iron Creator isn't multiplayer. That would probably kill our programmer if we suggested that. But the idea of you be able to build like a custom world. So you could build an island, your friend could build an island, and then you could actually then have them appear in your world. As it currently stands, we basically like kind of curate the islands that come into like the official server, which is what you kind of if you just buy the game and press play, you get a curated world of like islands that have kind of gone through a little bit of a filter, so we don't see anything too against TOS kind of coming in. But eventually, when we have that kind of world creation to the players, at that point, the guardrails are off, and you can add any islands you kind of want into your world, whether you want an island that's just your islands or you want like another kind of mixture. The goal there would be create the world you want with the islands you want, and then have that kind of like custom rule set, right, that is completely outside of what we ever planned for the game.
And if you even now, you can upload, for example, your island to the workshop, right? And then you can have like any friend download it basically and check it out, play around, run around, give you feedback, suggest some puzzles as well. So yeah, any islands basically can be uploaded to the public workshop.
Oh, that's great. I'm going to have to do that. Maybe torture some friends with some impossible puzzles. Because one thing I loved about the game overall, but also about the island creator itself, is that it essentially turns people into their own level designers. And I know that level design is just an incredibly challenging job. I mean, regardless of whether you're in a 2D platform or 3D procedurally generated world, whatever the platform is, it's hard. It's hard to make it interesting. It's hard to make it look seamless and immersive, so you don't see the lines. It's like in Skyrim when you can't actually go beyond the horizon. It just tells you, oh, you can't go that way. That's a pretty good level design. You feel so in the world that you can't see the end of it. And that has really stood out to me in Lost Skies. You don't feel like you're in this, like you feel like it just keeps going. You don't feel like you're in a box, which I think is something that personally I really love about games. And I'm so super curious how people have approached the design of the levels, because I really genuinely didn't expect there to be puzzles. And then as I started exploring different sort of caves and environments that were in the game, I got really excited because it uses all of the elements of physics and even lighting and all of these other hints to sort of show you where to go, but not necessarily hold your hand. And I love that kind of problem solving. What has that level design looked like? I can imagine that's been immensely challenging for the team to balance.
Well, I mean, the big challenging thing is knowing that players get these tools as well. Because it's one thing to, as game developers, to be like, oh, we need it to do this and this way. But it's suddenly when you're like, players can download this tool, all your level design tools, and they can create the same levels that you can create. How exactly do you set up these puzzles so they know how to use them and utilize them and sort of string them together and all? Because we have the little like mini scripting logic inside the Island Creator. That even that we tried to make as sort of straightforward as possible, because we know that the visual scripting things can get pretty out of hand. And in fairness, some of the islands that we've seen, players have just gone nuts, like essentially equivalent of like building like a calculator in Minecraft, where it's just like you look at the level and it's like a web of just these scripting nodes, and you're just like, wow, okay, I can't imagine how much work this would have taken. Because I think our intention was always that it was quite like, hey, I can link this thing to this thing to this thing, and it creates like a nice little chain of like, hey, I solved the puzzle, the door opened, some turrets attacked me, but then it unlocks a chest, right? But instead, like players, I saw one that was like a maze that before you went in, you could choose 2 difficulty levels. And so if you hit one switch, it set the maze to be a certain sequence. If you hit the hard switch, it set it up to be another way. And I'm just like, that's just, you can't predict for that. So it's like, you're kind of a little bit like nervous because you're like, hey, we did design it to be able to do this, but you've somehow managed to make it work. So we just, I hope you're still sane, but
Yeah, I can absolutely imagine. It was something I was thinking about as I watched. I have a friend, this sounds kind of weird. He used to be a student of mine a long time ago, but he would show me all of the things that he was building in various tools. There was a game that I've completely forgotten the name of, but it's a physics engine. It's kind of like Minecraft, except you have a lot more detail. It's not just rectangles. And he would build the craziest stuff in there, and I just never understood how he used these sort of rudimentary tools to essentially build rocket ships and things that shouldn't technically exist. And so it's really incredible to see that, probably from your guys' perspective, thinking, oh, you'll make a fun island with some puzzles, and then going and looking at these islands like, wow, you guys invested a lot of time here.
Yeah, but I still remember that time when somebody shared like an image of island they were working on in the Discord, and even I double took and went, what game have they shared then? And it was our game, and I put it into like our Slack to be like, I had to double take because I didn't think this was our game, because not only with the level design tools but also the art assets that we use, we have to kind of think that hey, players are going to be able to scale these and merge them together. So like how do we predict or adapt to that? And this was kind of evidence of that working, where even our artist was like, I can't figure out what assets they've used to create this thing because it just looked like a unique like scene with all completely custom art. But we were like, oh, did they mod the island creator and bring in their own custom 3D models? But no, they've just been super smart in how they kind of combined assets and stuff. And yeah, it's proper crazy what they can pull off in all those different facets, right, with the art as well as the puzzles and the gameplay.
Yeah, now Island Creator has been live for a while as well, so it's been live like before early access basically. And I think people explore other islands as well, and they kind of understand how maybe other people do this whole like mystery unfolding and stuff, so they get inspired by other creations as well. So the islands basically get better and better, and I think everyone's quite bought into like the fantasy of the world, so they kind of have quite a few ideas of how to make it engaging, how to make the treasures feel rewarding, like how to do the puzzles. So having Discord community again is super helpful for that, because they just chat with each other a lot and get inspired, get tips and tricks from each other.
Maybe they can find out what 3D models were altered, how the textures got changed, and how they built this entirely new place. It's really cool to see people almost challenge each other to level up their skills in that environment. And for you guys as a team, that's probably really exciting, because it reduces a lot of strain with the things that you have to develop for the game itself. Even with like procedural generation, as you mentioned, you start to kind of sense that as you play through a game a lot. And so yeah, you can reduce a lot of that work, but also empower your audience and your community to really take part in the actual story and environment and realm that you've spent so much time building. And I can imagine that feels really good to see people just really engaged and excited about what they're making. And what has also really stood out to me is the storytelling elements that go along with these environments that people are in. You're in this immense world, you're exploring, you're finding all of these places, but if you're a new player, as you're going through this environment, you start to find little pieces of hints and things. You're starting to put this sort of mental picture together of how you've come into this environment. It's in a very different vibe, an incredibly different vibe. Reminds me a little bit of sort of BioShock. It's sort of both retro but also the future at the same time, with a very different feeling. It's not scary to be there at all unless you're being chased. I don't remember what they're called, but it's got like a little laser on it and it shoots at you.
Oh yeah, Seraph drones, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, those are mildly scary because you have to dodge, and I never see them on the map. And I'm like, I should have spotted you from a mile away. But I love as you explore that you start to get a little hint here and a little hint here. How has this narrative in the world been structured? Is it in intended to kind of be open-ended, where somebody can sort of put their own thoughts or concepts into the story itself? Or is there deep lore that you'd like people to become aware of as they play the game?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a huge backstory that we basically tapped into to kind of set the player up and sort of at least have a little bit of a narrative pull through the game. There's definitely some sort of, I don't know, the way you have to approach the narrative in a game like this. I remember saying quite early on that we have to be not too precious, because when we are seeing islands from players, they will adapt the lore and they will create new element and bring them in, and sometimes you just have to kind of accept it. And in some ways it's kind of realistic, because I imagine if you were to dig through an ancient civilization, there's a, like if you look at the media we have today of short stories, films, propaganda, like all sorts of stuff, right? Like you can never guarantee what's true. And so if people are sort of playing through these islands and there's stuff that, maybe doesn't align with kind of like how the story was being told, it can just kind of still make sense, because you're like, well, there's no way of telling that wasn't somebody's story from the old world. So of course it doesn't make sense because it's fiction. But I think allowing players, and I think actually, because we built some islands in the game, especially the starting island, right? And even now as I, go through and I'm sort of curating islands that kind of come into the world like later, you can see them telling a similar story. Like it's almost like the setup of, the phrases, like we have the civilization you're exploring in Lost Skies is this like Saborian. They're called the Saborians, and they have this kind of like godliness to themselves. They perceive themselves to be gods, and so they sign off on their messages as like, we are gods. And it's interesting, I put that thread in throughout the tutorial, like the first island you play on, and now I see like stories and datapad writings and elements on other players' islands where they say like, we are gods, and they kind of speak in a grandiose way about how sort of like, special their civilization was and how great they were. And it's interesting watching players take that and roll with it, right? They haven't just gone, actually his name's Gary from Brighton or something. They which they could do, but it's really interesting that they sort of like to then be like part of the lore, part of the story, and so they take the kind of characterizations we've done and they carry them on, which actually then creates this really cool scenario where as a player you go through and you're like, oh, this is part of the same world, because players have kind of taken the torch, so to speak, carried it on. So that's one element of it, especially when it comes to the island creator. But in terms of the game structure, we still have the main storyline that we want to tell, which is you wake up in this mysterious ark. Like, how did I get here? Who built them? How did the world come to be this way? And so the way we sort of tell that story is because the players ultimately has the freedom to fly wherever they want, right? Like that was the main fantasy we wanted, which is I can look across the horizon and I can just pick a destination and go to it. So how do you tell a story in an environment where the player isn't on a set path? So that's how we kind of we just set up this narrative conceit of you are sort of discovering these arcs that you initially woke up on, and there are more throughout the world. And also we don't know what order you're going to find them in, but we kind of just said it so each new one you find and you reactivate and you basically reconnect the network, so you're essentially re-establishing like a lines of connection. I guess it's similar to like Death Stranding in a way, which you're trying to connect the United States back together, right? And as you do that, you're unveiling more of the story, more of the narrative, more of the lore, and you're kind of discovering more that way. And so it means we're able to kind of tell a somewhat linear story in a sort of open-ended, sort of open world.
Yeah, it's really fun to participate in that, because knowing of Worlds Adrift, it's still not a game that I actually have played, admittedly, and I am very new to the story. So what I've loved about playing through early release is trying to figure out what's going on but it's not in a way that feels uncomfortable. It's not like when you watch a movie and you have no idea what's going on for an hour and you just turn it off. It's the way that it's been structured is enticing, and you want to find more. You want to find more pieces of this story. You want to go and discover, why did I crash here? Why did this stop working? How can I fix this? What are these weird creatures in the sky? Oh, this thing is shooting at me. Why is it shooting at me? There's no one around. That's kind of weird. You start to kind of put these pieces together. It's really exciting to do exploration through it. And so all of this to basically just say that I enjoy that the structure has both fed into people who are existing fans, right? They can take part in the lore, they can be really excited about what's going on and even participate or collaborate with the story. But for somebody who's like me, who's maybe brand new to the environment, there's a lot there to pull on that's exciting, and you want to learn more about this ancient civilization, and hopefully fix your ship and go and get to do some really fun stuff. And something that really heightens the story in my experience is the way that the world itself is structured. It's beautiful, but there is sort of this hidden danger right around some corners where you're like, oh, a beautiful building, oh, I can die if I'm not very, very careful. Oh, I stepped wrong. Oh, okay, I need to look where I'm going. And so I love that this environment, one, encourages you to explore, but it becomes part of the story itself, the way that the environment has been structured. Was that by design? Was the environment intended to sort of heighten the gameplay and narrative experience?
Well, I think it's a very relatable trope in a way. Like, loads of games dabble in this idea of you're exploring an unknown world, right? It's why like the isekai and stuff is so popular, right? It's getting thrust into what you understand and taking that time to understand it and explore it. And I think there's something innate in humans about like digging into the past and exploring the unknown. Like, that's quite literally what led humans to always, be pushing the boundaries of our spaces, because we were always curious. And so when we build the assets and the elements that go into the environment, it's always under that guise of like, hey, this is going to be a ruined building or a defunct doorway or something like that. And so you're always looking at it through that lens. And I think that's why the Island Creator was kind of so successful in that, is because players just fundamentally understand, oh, I'm building a ruined island in the sky. We don't have to tell them to like, oh, make sure you put the treasure chest like at the end of the ruined temple. They just innately know that, and I'm going to make it so like there's a sun shaft coming down to shine on the chest. And that's something, one, you don't really get with procedural, and two, it's just like, again, just that human kind of curiosity leads them to know what makes that exploration compelling. And all we need to do is just make sure, hey, like, here's a crumbled wall and here's some debris, and then that's it. Then they're like, oh, I get it, I'm making like a ruined temple. And how far they kind of push that is really up to them. So
and I think we don't have, because we don't have such punishing systems, like, I don't know, if you don't eat you will die, or something like this. So we don't have these type of survival systems, but you still definitely have to survive and be prepared, because the world is dangerous, right? It's just kind of naturally occurs, so to speak, because if you walk into, I don't know, like a temple, for example, with treasure, and you suspect there will be treasure, then you can expect for it to be protected, right? But that's the pushback, basically, from the game, rather than some systems that force you into certain actions. So it's all like freedom of choice, but then you get the pushback there.
That totally makes sense. I love, I think it's berries that you have to eat in the game, and you eat a couple of berries and then just keep running for a while and hope that the berries sustain you until you can get more of them. That is a very good point, and something that I think, again, heightens that immersion. Something I wasn't expecting from the game as well is the sort of crafting element, where you have to find different things in the environment itself to continue building things for yourself, to continue building things for the place that you're in. I love that it makes you think about the survival. How would I actually take care of myself if I were to find myself in a pretty horrible situation? Can you imagine really being stuck there? It'd be awful. You can't turn it off and leave. Wow, that would be really bad. But I love that it makes you sort of reflect on, how your life is outside of the game. But I really enjoyed that you can decide which direction you want to head. What things do you want to build for yourself? What do you want to start with? Are you going to prioritize self-defense? Are you going to try to prioritize something else? Like, and which piece do I want to build, essentially? So I love how much power too is given to a player, even though there is this story that people can follow along. You're also welcome as a player to wander around and maybe not necessarily engage. I'm not going to lie, I spent about an hour just looking around the island, just not doing anything, like collecting things and sort of looking off edges and seeing how close I could get before I fall and how long do I fall. The fake world that you live in when you play games. And I really truly enjoy how flexible the gameplay is for a player to come in and interact with in the way that they see fit. And I think that that's probably been immensely immensely challenging for the team to try to balance all of those things. Have you run into any, major technical challenges? I'm sure that with code or some of the, the elements that have to be added into these maps and also if you do use any kind of procedural generation, I know there can sometimes be challenges there as well, just to make sure it doesn't, kill your CPU when you hit go. So yeah, how has the team been able to approach some of the technical challenges from developing such a massive title?
Well, which ones do we start with? Just fundamentally, a very kind of physics-driven multiplayer game is going to come with endless things that surprise you and bring joy. But I think the big one that we still haven't quite got locked down, but we're making some good progress is it's just the scale of the world. So the way that game engines work is the further you get away from what you call the origin point, the less stable things get. Right, it's almost like the world starts to quite literally fall apart. And so when we have this world that is hundreds and hundreds of kilometers, you can go anywhere in any direction. What we essentially have to do is we have to remap the origin of the world every time you reach a new island. So we're never letting the player kind of get into the unstable edges of the world. But what that means then is that every time we have to shift that origin, and we're doing it for all of the players and all of the objects and all of the islands to sort of shift it so it's around the player rather than the player moving into the environment. And that causes all sorts of hey, the world thinks you're here, the ship thinks you're here, and then you ping or you bounce or somebody doesn't get the update. And so that's the big one that is taking up a lot of our time, and we're slowly chipping away at it. And it just happens, occasionally now some data packet will get lost and create this kind of almost what we call rubber band effect.
Especially when people go to different places, right? So if one person and their ship goes to one place and another person goes into a completely different direction, now they have this almost two worlds loading around them.
Yeah, and then you have to kind of sync that information between players and stuff. And so I think right now, occasionally you'll be on an island and you'll see another player on another island, but you'll see them as if they're on your island, but they'll be walking around in the sky because to them they're on an island somewhere else. And so we know what the issue is. It's just how do you sort of decouple that and make it stable, especially with a live game as well. You have to be super careful to preserve that the data and the world saves of current players. So
yeah, because we want to avoid basically wiping progress as much as possible. I think hopefully the only time we do it is basically before we release into 1.0. So it's just chipping away at it without disrupting the live game too much.
I think that's a brilliant plan because as you mentioned, I play a lot of games that don't necessarily allow you to save at any point. I love when a game lets you do that, just for the record, but there are some games that I understand why. You have to finish a certain level before you're able to save, or you have to go to bed at night or something along these lines. It can be incredibly frustrating. I have actually quit games before if they don't save my progress. So I can imagine that would be a huge thing to stand out to the team to try to ensure is working. Also, it sounds like in a way it's kind of a funny error that somebody's floating around in the sky and you hope that people just find it funny, but maybe they don't, just depends on the day. So I can imagine, it's also probably hard when things happen on a technical aspect to try to relate that to the audience. Have you found that your audience is fairly understanding, especially because it is early access? What has the public response been to hot fixes and things as they arise?
I would say generally yes. It's always interesting with community, and I understand it from the player's perspective. You can get a review, for example, on Steam for early access, which highlights all the positives and then some bugs, and that can result in a positive or a negative review, because sometimes people give you a negative review because they want you to keep improving it. Sometimes they give you a positive review and encourage you to still keep improving it, right? So it's definitely, it gets called out a lot, I think, on the technical side, all the issues. But what we've seen so far is that the vision of the game and the gameplay really resonates with people. So I think that as long as we always dedicate time to tackling all these technical challenges, we should hopefully be in a good place and be able to make a game people enjoy.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've noticed that a lot of developers, and I think this is true too, I'm going to break the fourth wall again. If you're watching this, please make sure to leave reviews on Steam. That's really helpful for a team. It's really been a huge thing to be able to actually interact with the people who make the games. And I love that you've got such a responsive and excited team. It's super cool. And I can imagine, yeah, that you're like, I'm sorry you're floating around in the sky, dude. I promise you we're trying to fix it. And that's yeah, I think, you know, as you're developing something that's entirely new, that's entirely yours, at least aside from the collaboration factor anyway, there's definitely going to be edges where things probably break. And I'm super excited to see the things as they are continuously improving. The game is already incredible. I haven't experienced any bugs personally. I put in quite a few hours. I'm not gonna lie myself. And so I can see as a player just the immense passion and excitement that both the team and the players have for Lost Skies, and it's going to be really fun to share that experience with people. And yeah, I'm curious about the publishing standpoint. You know, I can see from my perspective why I'm really excited to play this game, but what have you found from the player community? What is it that brings people back? What makes them excited about playing your title?
I think like the thing that we felt from Worlds Adrift was that a world of like just that freedom. I think that was always such an important part. Was I start here, but I can see, you know, what looks like an infinite world on the horizon, right? I can see an island that's quite close to me. I can also think I see something just in the distance, like peeking out from behind a cloud. And for me, that's always been such a major driver of just like, I want to see what's beyond there. I want to get past that. And I think to do that with friends and explore together is always like, it's one of the best things that games can bring as an experience. And it's all about like then putting in those barriers that you have to overcome, right? So yes, you're on this island, but unless you have a ship, you ain't going anywhere. And so suddenly it's like, okay, we need to build this ship, but how do we build it? Okay, what parts do we use? What's gonna make our ship go the fastest? What's gonna make it handle the best? You know, those are all elements we want you to kind of be thinking about. And what materials do we use? And all this. Then not only that, but then you're like, okay, there's this huge, strange creature in the sky that's going to attack us, or hey, there's this like insurmountable like weather anomaly that we need to get through. How do we do that? Like, how do we tackle it? Because I want to see what's beyond it. I think that fundamentally is always going to be kind of the linchpin of this game, like the promise of this game that will bring people like back to it or wanting to experience it.
Yeah, I think we see also, like from the data standpoint, very high median time as well in the game. And what we notice is that like people genuinely just love exploring. When we shipped the demo, I think, Luke, was it 4 islands, right, in the demo?
Yeah.
And some people spent 50 hours just exploring those because they wanted to go to every single corner. So they weren't even like, well, I don't even need to know the whole story, you know, I just want to go everywhere with my friends. So that's really nice, and hopefully means like quite a lot of longevity for the game as well, right? If we expand the world and players enjoy being in this world, well, that's amazing. If they enjoy it even after they complete the main quest storyline.
We're currently planning the world map for our next kind of like 1.0 and next releases and stuff, and it's already like 3 to 4 times larger than the current map. So we know there's going to be a lot more to explore and overcome. And then at the end, fundamentally as well, we've also just got that grappling hook that people always have fun just swinging around. Saw articles, like Sven mentioned earlier, about this might just be the best grappling hook in video games and stuff like that, which we'll be working on it for 10 years, so we hope that it's good. And I remember like even the early prototypes for Worlds Adrift was, we knew if we got the grappling hook fun, then the rest of the game would be easier.
This has been so interesting with the grappling hook, the whole saga behind it, because when you first try it, sometimes it can feel like it's too hard, you can't figure it out. So there's been a lot of balance in how to not oversimplify it, but to still let you feel like you mastered it. And that's when you have to review new player feedback quite like from a critical perspective, right? Because you don't want to make it too simple and then you lose all the joy once you master it. But I think we managed to get it to a very good place. It's been a lot of back and forth.
Yeah, that was definitely like now, well, because we still have the Worlds Adrift Island creator. Unfortunately, because it's an MMO, the actual game is no longer online. But you can play the island creator for Worlds Adrift, and it's just a stark contrast where like that was back when we thought the grappling hook was good, because we went through the same process when developing Worlds Adrift, right? Like, make sure it's skill based and it's fun to use. And and all this. But now, actually, when you compare Lost Skies to what Worlds Adrift ended up as, it's just brutal. Like Worlds Adrift, you're just dying all the time, and it's like very cumbersome, very unforgiving, and like that's what we thought was fine, and just that contrast now, and a lot of that was because we were bringing in new players into Lost Skies, especially, and just it's very humbling as a developer because you're getting every time they're going like grappling hook's too hard, make it easy, and you're like, really? Like we've done so much to it already. We've made it. We thought we'd made it as easy as possible, but we're still getting the feedback that it's too difficult. I don't understand it. I can't find the fun with it or something. So yeah, it was. I was a big sort of track during Lost Skies development was take this grappling hook, make it more accessible, make it more forgiving, like allow the average person to have as much fun with it as sort of those dedicated hardcore players would in the previous game. So.
Yeah, I can imagine that was hard. It's funny because I can think of a few times, I've never thought about it from a development standpoint until now, that I can remember vividly certain occasions in games where I can't figure it out. I hate to bring up Horizon again. It's just that game stands out as one where I had a really hard time mastering that tool. Now I know how to use it, or at least I did for a brief time. But I can imagine from the developer standpoint, yeah, like you mentioned, trying to make it challenging enough that you feel rewarded when you do actually finally master the tool. Because I think that is something that brings us back to games, is that we want to improve, we want to get better, we want to gain new skills, and then at some point you feel like you're a master of this world. And I think that is such a joy in games. But at a certain point, if the learning curve is too high, potentially that works as an enemy of keeping people in the game or people staying engaged. So I am really excited to grapple more and hopefully be a lot better at using this tool than some of the ones that I have been in the past. I'm not the best grappler, but I suppose that is what it is. I'll have to practice. I'll have to practice my skills. Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for chatting with me today. Is there anything that you would like to say to potential people that might come and play your game, or to the community that already follows you?
Well, I think just a massive thank you to our community so far, because honestly, without them, we've been doing open development for years at this point as well. So that's been hundreds of players who actually played it before it even went to early access. And if you want to be a part of a really active, nice community, please join our Discord. I'll make sure that we send you all the links for that.
Yeah, and thanks again. And if what we talked about today sounds appealing or exciting, then just jump in, have a go, let us know what you think, and we've got more updates on the way. So hopefully, we just keep making it better.
Awesome. Well, thank you both immensely for your time. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your week. I hope you're having a good day coming back off of a long weekend. I'm sure that it's not feeling like a full work day. So I hope that it's very good to you.
Awesome.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks a lot.